So we've got a bunch of new datamined cards in this video, and some of them are really crazy. I mean, both from a potential power level standpoint, some scary stuff in here, but also just some really neat designs, some complex stuff we haven't seen before quite yet in Marvel Snap. So a lot to talk about in this one. Now, do keep in mind these cards come from data mines. These are not necessarily the final official versions. At this stage, we do still see sometimes some number tweaks here and there before the card's final release. Once they're formally revealed, we'll do a formal card review where we give them scores. For now, we're just talking through these, giving our first impressions and coming up with cool ideas for how some of these cards might be utilized. So all that said, let's kick it off here with our first card, which is Elsa Bloodstone, the season pass card for October. So Elsa's a pretty cool card with some big number potential. She is a 2/2 to base, and her text reads, if you play another card to fill a location, give it +3 power. So of course, with 3 locations in a game, that it means, you know, potentially 3 times activating this effect. That's +9 power possible off Elsa. She's a 2/2. That effectively would make her a 2/11 in stats, which is actually nuts. I think technically you could even get more locations filled with stuff like moving or maybe getting destroyed. So theoretically, even higher is possible. I think more realistically, you know, a variety of decks could pretty easily turn this into an effective 2/5 or 2/8. You probably have to build your deck pretty specifically to fill all 3 locations to make her something like a 2/11. But, you know, a 2/8 still really good. If your deck is reliably filling up 2 spots, Elsa might be worth it. Now, I do think there's an important indicator here in her text that's noteworthy. It does say if you play another card. So some things that like automatically fill locations, like Ultron playing out his bots and filling it with bots. You're not playing those bots. They're getting summoned out of Ultron. So I don't think those would activate. I think you have to manually place that 4th card in the location to get the activation here. Otherwise, it might just be too easy to dump stuff like Ultron and activate this. But that's still obviously not difficult for a lot of decks to do. You play a swarm, 3 spots are filled. That 4th spot is very easy to activate with something like Elsa Bloodstone. So you could see this in any kind of swarmier deck, tempo decks that are just putting a lot of smaller cards into play. It's probably not tough for Elsa to get quite a bit of value. So, you know, Sarah dumping a big hand late, anything with Broods and Sinisters, etc. works. Just playing a lot of mid-game cards, getting 2 full locations, not tough. Cards like Silk might even allow you to get multiple locations turned on with Elsa multiple times. It's like you use Silk to fill it up, your opponent plays, Silk moves out, you go again, right? It's so interesting little 2-drop scaler of sorts, basically kind of in that like Angela space where you're just getting a lot of stats. But importantly with Elsa, they're also spreading out, so you're not committing a bunch of stats into like a Shang-Chi target with Angela. You might be getting 3 different cards getting the +3, which makes it easier potentially to dodge removal, but also a little bit harder condition to activate. Could be location restrictions and such that do hold her back. Also noteworthy though is that since you're giving the stats to the card, you might be able to do things like scale up important cards. Getting a Dakin with an extra +3 means he's going to double even higher. You know, Lady Deathstrike, whatever other cards benefit from having those stats can go even farther potentially with Elsa Bloodstone here backing them up. So some really interesting potential. I think a card that could be both sort of a general use case. If you're just running a fast enough deck, getting, you know, 2 activations out of this reliably is powerful, and then also enabling like swarmier decks that are going full into the board, zoo decks, dumping a bunch of stats and trying to get, you know, all 3 or even more activations out of Elsa. Also cool. So big numbers means definite potential. So moving on, I've got a few more October cards here before moving into the November cards. Now, I don't know if these are in release order or not, so don't count on these coming out in this order. But next up is the Black Knight. He's a new 1/2, and he reads, after you discard a card, remember he needs to be on board for this effect to activate, add the Ebony Blade to your hand with that card's power once per game. So you play this out in a discard deck. You play a Lady Sif shortly thereafter. You want the Lady Sif in this case to be the first thing you discard because that's the one that's going to activate the Black Knight. So if you played, you know, a Colleen Wing on 2 and discarded something small, you'd be sad. But if you wait till turn 3 and you play a Lady Sif, if you only have an Infinite in hand, which you could build your deck to do, to make sure that you only have a really big 6-drop, for instance, in hand, or maybe a really big 5-drop like Red Skull backup plan or something, right? You're going to discard your Infinite, that means your Ebony Blade is going to be a 420. It's just going to have that card's power, which obviously is insane. Just a straight up 420 that you can play. Also keep in mind, you still have Ghost Rider, because you didn't use up the discard pile Infinite. It's still in your discard pile. Ebony Blade just borrowed its stats. So then you can also play a Ghost Rider, which is basically a 423. So you have Black Knight into Sif, into Ebony Blade, or Ghost Rider in whichever order you prefer. And it's like, my God, I'm just playing Infinite stats over and over again. And you really don't need much else to do in your deck. And, you know, obviously you got to have the right sort of things in the right order there. But those lines and turns are going to exist. And since you don't have to dedicate an entire deck to it, you can still build a good deck around that, whether discard or otherwise. But, you know, just toss in this and a Lady Sif, and you're kind of off to the races in a deck that can actually do some pretty crazy stuff. So I think that's really scary. I don't think you necessarily want to use this in a regular discard deck, because obviously it's going to be harder to control what your Ebony Blade is going to turn into. You really want to manipulate those stats. This reminds me a little bit more of sort of like Dracula dump style decks we saw for a little while there, where you've got some of those big key 6-drops in hand and you're trying to manipulate towards those specifically. There might also be some possibilities with Apocalypse in this case too. You know, you play Black Knight sort of late and you make sure you're discarding a really big Apocalypse, and then you maybe can play like an Ebony Blade on turn 5 or turn 6 even, and utilize those Apocalypse's stats. Then maybe have a Dracula elsewhere that also utilizes those Apocalypse's stats. So couple different angles here to manipulate this Ebony Blade into really big, enormous numbers. But I think the Lady Sif thing is the most reliable and predictable, because, you know, getting your Black Knight down at the right time without having discarded it first might be a little bit difficult in discard decks. But nonetheless, the numbers here, again, can be really, really big, which is a good sign for a card. And I like that you don't necessarily have to go all in. Like a 3 or 4 card package might be enough for this one, which is pretty cool. So some real potential once again, and kind of a crazy scary card. Couple, you know, 4 cost 20 power plays is nuts. All right, so moving on to Man Thing. This is a new 4/5 with ongoing. 1, 2, and 3 cost cards here have -2 power. So nice affliction sort of card here. Now it does note have a symmetrical effect that's going to affect both you and your opponent's cards, but hopefully you can still net a nice advantage. Find a location the opponent's played a couple smaller things. I mean, particularly, you know, up to 3 cost. Not crazy to see like a 1 and a 3 come together in the early game. That means your Man Thing is already effectively a 4/9, -4 to your opponent, +5 to you. That's a nice big 4-drop. That's a great swing, especially in Zabu decks. That will feel like a nice power addition. You know, often we're happy to see like 4/10 Darkhawks. This isn't that similar sort of space. It does make it a little bit difficult to support this card with your own cards. Like you can't say like toss in a 1-drop to sort of shore up a location late. It's, at least you can, but you know, it's going to lose effectiveness basically. So it might be hard. Like you feel like you have to commit another 4 or another 5 or 6 to support your Man Thing, which could make it feel a little susceptible. But I can imagine things like, you know, just a Doom Bot flying over. You got a Man Thing and a Doom Bot that's +10, maybe like -4 to your opponent. That feels like a suitable place to live. There also might be some shenanigans possible here. We're going to see a card Annihilus later in the video that can send your low or negative power cards to your opponent. So you could maybe like play small stuff, Man Thing your small stuff, and then Annihilus it over to your opponent so they're stuck with a locked location of negative power cards. It's kind of a neat combo idea. It feels a little too all in or kind of specific, but at least some possibilities and technicalities exist. Also, of course, any ongoing manipulations, you play this in Onslaught Citadel, it's going to stack up. Play a Spectrum with it. It's a nice way to support this card. So ultimately, though, you know, I think just real good power swing potential. This could help you just really make a lane frustrating for your opponent to win. It's a good counter to things like Brood. Okay, you're going to go 3 cards wide. Man Thing instantly takes -6 out of your location. So all in all, I think the numbers again on this card look pretty good. All right, so next up here is Werewolf by Night, a new 3/3 that reads, after you play an on-reveal card at another location, move there and gain +2 power. Now, by my reading, that is something that can happen multiple times. I think this card also needs that to get big enough. We saw Black Knight here say once per game. We see cards like Silk that say after they move multiple times. So what that means is, you're going to be bouncing this guy around, basically play him on 3, maybe play 2 on reveals on 4, small stuff. He goes to 7. You play another one on 5. He goes to 9. You play 2 more on 6. You've got yourself a 13 power Werewolf by night. And obviously a 3/13 is completely insane. And you're not necessarily sacrificing a lot because maybe you're playing on reveal cards you're happy to play anyway. Although this does have move synergies and you might have cards like Craven or other move support cards in your deck. You don't have to. This is based on reveals. So he could just be a way to spike power in an otherwise on reveal deck that's doing other things and has a game plan all of its own, which I think makes this card really kind of scary. Big potential numbers, multiple angles of approach here, both in move and otherwise, and there's just enough good on reveal action that you feel like you could probably toss this into a variety of different decks. If you get 3 or 4 on reveals reliably after you play your Werewolf by night, I think you're happy. 3/7, 3/9, that's already a really good number for a card like this one. And the unpredictability of where that power is going to land is another really big upside of this. Like, your opponent doesn't know where that on reveal is going to go necessarily, so it makes it really hard to potentially play into this, and that could be quite nice. That adds an extra layer, of course, when you're talking about things like snapping. So good numbers, unpredictable. In skilled hands, this looks like again a very terrifying, sort of very big high numbered card. All right, so next up is Nico Minoru. She's a new 1/2, and complicated effect here. On reveal, after you play your next card, cast a spell. This spell changes each turn. So this text, I think, as this reads, you will never actually see this text other than in your collection manager. But once she's in a game, basically she's going to update her on reveal every turn into, I presume, a random effect in a random order. The effects are here. So for instance, on turn 1, she might say on reveal, after you play your next card, it becomes a demon. On turn 2, she might say on reveal, after you play your next card, destroy it and draw 2 cards. After you play your next card, move it 1 location to the right. After you play your next card, give it +2 power. After you play your next card, replace that card's location. After you play your next card, add a copy of it to your hand. And after you play your next card, double this card's power. So basically a handful of, slightly higher utility effects. Some a little bit more conditional or unfortunate, like you may not want to destroy it and draw 2 cards. You may want the power instead of the cards. The move may not always be useful. So, I don't think you can run this in a move deck and hope to hit the move right enough. It's gonna be like, well, that's just not gonna line up very often. It's more about saying, okay, I've got this base 1/2, that's a fine base, and then occasionally I'm gonna realize a nice benefit off the Nico, enough so that it's worth running this card. So I need to delete a location. Okay, that lined up great. I get a copy of the awesome card I'm about to play. Oh, okay, that's cool. I really want to get a second Jeff or whatever on turn 2. There will be instances where the stars sort of align and you're really happy. And generally these are mostly positive things. Sometimes it's just like literally, hey, give your next card +2 power. That's nice. Double a Nico's power. That's kind of like +2 power. Okay. So the real question is the sort of intersection between utility and reliability and whether that makes this card worth it. I have some doubts there. This is gonna be super fun regardless, trying to piece together all the different options and possibilities for Nico and each turn kind of reviewing, how useful is that? That's a fun thing to do in a given game. I do fear a lot of decks, though, are going to say, it's just too much to mess with. I need more reliable plans. I want a 1-drop that always does something useful. I'd rather just run Iceman because I know it's disruptive, whatever example you want. So the unreliability here, the unpredictability of Nico might actually be its downside, certainly more than its upside. I don't think any of these are so powerful or so big and awesome that it's necessarily worth the risk of her feeling a bit like a dead card, or sometimes even unplayable. Like, oh man, I can't have her destroying stuff. Oh god, I don't want my next card to move right. I need it to be left or mid or whatever. I need it to be in a specific place. No, don't move right. That's bad. So it's really, really fun. It's a really cool idea, but I'd say only about a third of these are really always good, like +2 power or double this card's power. A third are probably kind of very situational, like the movement or the location change probably aren't even that good. Some are downright risky, like the demon or destroying your card. Like that might not be something you want at all. Might still be good, of course. You may upgrade something to demon. You may just happily take the 2 cards, but they're risky at the very least. So that's a pretty wide range of results. Not all of these are directional in the same sort of area, which I worry is going to hold this card back, but still looks super fun either way. I'm excited to play this one for sure. So now we're moving into the November cards, and it looks like Miss Marvel will be the season pass card for November, and she's had a change here since when we saw some early data mines on this one. She's a 4/5. Ongoing, adjacent locations where your cards have unique costs have +5 power. So if you play, say, Miss Marvel in the middle, as would be ideal, and like the left location has a 1, 2, and 3 cost card, that location has 3 different unique costs. It'll gain +5 power. If you played a second 3 cost card there, too bad. You turn off your Miss Marvel in that location, you've lost your +5 power. So basically, playing on curve perfectly would be potentially great for Miss Marvel. Maybe you put a 1 left, a 2 right, a 3 left, Miss Marvel in the middle, a 5 right, and a 6 left, and you've got 3 unique costs at each location, whatever. And that makes Miss Marvel effectively a 4/15, which is actually really big. That's an insane stat output when she works. Sometimes that can be difficult. Sometimes things can go wrong. Locations can screw you. Sometimes you need the specific card in a specific place for a given reason. Sometimes things get messed up. She's still a 4/10 if you get 2 locations only. That's pretty nice, actually. And you can always dump extra stuff in the Miss Marvel location as well. I think the original data mine of this card said like she had to be alone or something, right? But remember, it's only the adjacent locations that are being affected. So if you have an extra 3-drop but nowhere to play it or whatever, because one location's locked off, you got a 3-drop there, put it with Miss Marvel, right? It's still a lot of flexibility, which to me, I think makes this card look really good. Like a lot of decks want to play on curve anyway. Extra 1-drops, throwing it into the Miss Marvel location is not a big deal. Extra 2-drop in Miss Marvel's fine. You can still use, other wide board cards to fully support Mr. Fantastic on 3, Miss Marvel on 5, Doctor Doom on 6. That's not going to mess anything up, right? It's still potentially a ton of super wide board power. So I think in both like more traditional curve decks where you've just got a nice mix of costs, I don't think it's going to be too crazy hard to balance things out and just make this a really effective, efficient stat line. And then also, like we talked about Dooms and Fantastics and so on, you could build kind of a tri-lane sort of deck all in its own too. So I like this, man. Sometimes it's risky splitting stats out too much because you want to really target a couple specific locations, but her numbers are big enough that you're not sacrificing much to target all 3. It's just super efficient. If it was like 4 power across all 3 locations, certainly 3 power across all 3 locations, you'd be a little more nervous that your numbers weren't going to be big enough. But I think 5 across all 3 spots, that feels really, really good. Effectively, a Doctor Doom in a lot of cases for 4 energy. That's great. So I think this card actually looks really strong. The numbers feel pushed on this one to me. I think it's not going to be that hard to activate reliably, and also just very efficient. All right, so next up here is Gladiator, and man, I always loved this character as a kid. I thought his design was cool as a kid. It looks kind of goofy as an adult, but I'm still really excited about this because of nostalgia. Gladiator is a 3/8. On reveal, add a card from your opponent's deck to their side of this location. If it has less power, destroy it. So he's going to yank a card out of your opponent's deck and force a duel with said card. If he gets something small, you've netted yourself a 3/8 and your opponent has nothing, and they've lost a resource in deck, and potentially you've disrupted, some kind of combo piece or something you're happy to delete. If it yoinks something bigger, you have screwed yourself because your opponent has gotten a totally free card that is enormous out of their deck, and you've merely got a 3/8, and you spent 3 energy to go equal or net negative on power with your opponent, and also just thinned out their draw as well. Also keep in mind, in a game like Marvel Snap, if you pull an on reveal card, it's still going to realize it's on reveal. In Hearthstone, for instance, for those of you who may or may not play Hearthstone, when you pull a card from your opponent's deck or hand, if it has the equivalent of an on reveal, it doesn't go off. So that can be a really powerful effect in Hearthstone. It's like, oh, I ruined your on reveal. You don't get to use your awesome ability. You just get stats. In Marvel Snap, it's still gonna reveal. So for any of my Hearthstone players out there, this is not a Dirty Rat in Marvel Snap. Dirty Rat is a card kind of like this in Hearthstone. It does not work the same way and is not in effect that's as powerful. They still get the on reveal ability. The only time this is going to be useful is if you pull the smaller thing and destroying it had no downside. Obviously with destroy decks, pull Bucky Barnes, you know, they still get a 2/6. They're not that unhappy, right? You pull a Nimrod, oh crap, they've got 2 other Nimrods. There's a lot of risks there. And then against decks with big stuff, if you pull big stuff, you pull an Infinite out of their deck, you spend 3 energy to lose 12 power effectively. So I worry the risks here for Gladiator are very, very high, and a lot of decks can punish this pretty reliably. And I worry the upside isn't quite big enough. A 3/8 is good, don't get me wrong, but would you rather just play a 3/5 that you know works and reliably gets you power and like has probably still some kind of effect you don't mind, or has an upside like Spider-Man or something? Whereas playing Gladiator sometimes just outright loses you the game because you yoinked something enormous from your opponent. And, you know, you've basically screwed yourself. Now, there's going to be a conversation in the comments, as always with cards like this, where it's like, well, I'm going to pull my opponent's big, awesome combo piece or win condition or whatever awesome thing. I'm going to pull their Galactus and delete their Galactus. And awesome. Yay, I did it. And that will happen from time to time because that happens. You're going to pull the Galactus. But I want to issue a warning here, and we've had this conversation 1,000 times in card games. When you're pulling from their deck, it's not actually disruptive because you're actually just as likely to make them draw into a Galactus that they otherwise wouldn't have drawn as you are to hit a Galactus and delete it. In other words, you're going to pull the card right before Galactus some of the time, and they're going to draw a Galactus that they otherwise might have missed at the bottom of their deck. And Galactus is not the best example these days, but you deal with it. You know, it's a combo piece kind of win condition example that we all understand. So just as often as this wins you a game with the Galactus, it's very often going to lose you a game for the exact same sort of reason. So ultimately, I don't think it's on a disruption value here. Having super high risk card. I think the stat line on this actually needs to be higher to make this feel worth it necessarily. If you have other ways to benefit, you know, like, okay, man, even if I pull an A, I'm gonna like surfer this or something. Still doesn't feel right to me. Let's play a Brood, right? So I don't know, man. The risks on this seem pretty crazy, but I like how complex this is. I think it's a card a lot of people are going to talk about and think about and play around with. And certainly in some metas where there's a lot more small wide board plays where this is more likely to hit just 3s and 4s and stuff and connect as a free easy 3/8, it might get enough boost to see play. I think there are a lot of other metas where this is going to feel super risky, where you're just pulling big stuff and this just goes net negative and gives your opponent free energy basically, and a free extra resource that they wouldn't have otherwise had because this pulls from deck. Remember, again, not from hand. So ultimately, I don't know, man, risky card. I don't think it's going to see play very often, but definitely a cool design I'm excited to try. So moving on here, we've got Annihilus, and this card has changed a tons in some of the early data mining. This is a 5/8, and he has on reveal, your cards with 0 or less power switch sides, and you destroy those that can't switch sides, assuming your opponent has, you know, like a full location or whatever. So this is a really kind of crazy idea. Now, we talked about Man-Thing earlier, right, where maybe there's a combo here where you play small stuff, Man-Thing gives it negative power, and then you lock down your opponent's location with Annihilus. It's kind of a cool, maybe like, you know, turn 1, 2, 4, 5 sort of thing, but fairly big commitment as well. The Annihilus doesn't have to go in the same location, obviously, so, you know, you can play him in one spot, do that Man-Things to win a location. Hopefully the 5/8 Annihilus helps you win a second location, maybe followed up with a big 6 drop. That's definitely a possibility for a line. Seems a little too conditional, like you got to get things in the right order for it to work well. Other angles for Annihilus, obviously just regular negative power cards. You've got the Hood, Mr. Negative, and I guess the dude from Sentry, the Void from Sentry. I think that's it right now as far as negative power cards in Marvel Snap. So not a ton, like not enough to build an entire deck around necessarily, but still could be pretty disruptive, right? Because obviously giving your opponent cards has a benefit beyond just the negative power. It also removes spaces from play. So if you lock out a location, might be really easy to win it on a final turn. Obviously, if you give them a -10 void from the Sentry, that's an amazing swing, right? Just a big 4-drop, big 5-drop, -10 power. That could close out a game. There is also the other possibility of just giving them 0 power stuff and using that to fill them up. So, you know, even like an Ironheart or whatever, you benefit from the Ironheart, give your opponent that 0 power, use it, you know, alongside some rocks or something, debris or whatever. Maybe use this in a bit of a lockdown deck. So I think some interesting angles here. I don't know that there is like the critical mass of cards necessary to make Annihilus a win condition in its own right. Like, I don't know if you can necessarily build an entire deck around this game plan, but we've already seen some like Sentry Viper stuff. This kind of removes the need of the Viper being a perfect target and just makes an all-in button to do that. Just play the Annihilus and it's like, boom, that whole job is done. So that might kind of soften some of the rough edges on that kind of deck and make it easier. But maybe also you just run some decks now with a Sentry on 4 and an Annihilus on 5, and that feels like really powerful kind of late game stat dump sort of plays, and since it's still a 5/8 at the end of the day. So I don't know, man. I don't think a card you see everywhere, all over the place as a, you know, it's not a Legion, for instance. It just fits in so many different decks, but it does have this specific, interesting utility that might carve out a nice little deck for itself in combination with some of these other cards. And also one of those cards to keep in your back pocket as future like negative power cards, or negative affliction cards, or 0 power cards come in. Annihilus might start to stack up enough stuff to kind of get revisited over time and become a really interesting option. So I think this is a really neat design, if a little bit difficult or complicated to use. Very excited to try this though. So finally here we have Martyr, a 2/6. This is a crazy effect. It's a backwards Captain Marvel. The end of the game, move to a location that loses you the game, if possible, instead of winning you the game, which is kind of crazy. Now, obviously getting a really nice base stat line here as a 2/6. I would argue it's not that much better than something like Silk or Lizard at 2/5, just a little bit better. But in my experience, Silk already has this effect. She moves to a location that loses you the game already. I don't know why they just reprinted Silk. That's a good joke. I need to put that on Twitter. But you know, interesting. A little bigger. Could this be a 2/7? Maybe, I don't know, possibility. But this is a really cool idea to kind of to piece out in your head how often this is going to happen. Do you think this is going to be any good? Really hard to know. It's one of those cards I think you kind of have to see in practice a little bit. But an interesting idea, because, you know, sometimes if you're able to go wide enough, number one, this may have nowhere to go. If you have full locations, you're playing something like Elsa Bloodstone or whatever, there's nowhere for Martyr to move. All the locations are already full. She just stays put, and you got yourself a really nice, reliable 2/6, which is pretty cool. But sometimes, even if she does have places to move, if a game is close enough, then that move might just like help you win somewhere else. Of course, she wouldn't move, but you know what I'm saying? Like, she'll check and she'll be like, oh, well, if I move to this other location I'm losing, I'm going to swing that location in my favor and I'll still win the game. Like maybe you've won like middle and it's full and she can't go middle. So she's like, okay, maybe I can move right. That'll help me lose left, but actually that's just going to swing right in my favor and I'll win right. So she won't move in that case, but you know, she'll check and be like, oh, okay. So in other words, will her moving ever actually result in you losing a game? It could. One way is if, you know, you're winning mid really big and you have a spot open and she moves mid and it's just a waste of power. Like she's like, oh yeah, this is overkill, but there's a spot, so I'm going to move mid and lose you left. So, you know, it's one of those where you might be able to control the board in such a situation where you can kind of lock her out of a location that might otherwise be a risk. Just make sure you're filling it up with 4 cards. Like if she moves right, you're close enough that she wins right. If she stays left, okay, you win left. So I don't know, with a little bit of control, I think it's going to be avoidable. But then the question becomes like, is it worth it? Would I rather just run a 2/5? You know, would I rather run the Lizard? Would I rather run Silk? Is that just going to be as good without any of the sort of risk? Because I'm sure there will still be moments where it's just like impossible to avoid the Martyr losing you a game because of weird locations and stuff, or you just don't hit the right sort of cards. You can't fill up a spot. It does seem rather risky in that case. So outside of a deck that very reliably fills up all locations, I don't know. Martyr seems not enough upside here to overcome the major risk and downside. So in other words, 2/7, 2/7 a little better, because right now at 2/6 I'm probably running Silk, Lizard, whatever sort of option instead of this card, because this one seems risky. But a really cool idea here as a reverse Captain Marvel. I think very fun card to play around. Probably gonna break a lot of brains as well as Captain Marvel already has, but super fun idea. So all that said, let's do a final rankings for these cards, which is going to be tough because it's 2 months worth of cards. But I think the best card of this batch will be Mrs. Marvel, followed by Werewolf by Night, and then Black Knight. Seems like those 420s will be huge. Elsa Bloodstone is next. Then we got Man-Thing, followed by Annihilus. I think this is where things get a little more situational, a lot harder to use these cards. Martyr, just not sure the numbers are quite big enough. And then in last place here, I guess we have Nico. Oh, not last place. Second to last place, we have Nico Minoru. Again, kind of situational, might be too inconsistent. And then actually in last place, we have Gladiator. I think this was just gonna feel too risky. Again, maybe the numbers have to be a little bit bigger on this guy. But those are my final rankings, and that wraps it up for this leaked cards discussion. I want to hear your thoughts on these cards. Were they going to be good? Were they going to be bad? Which ones might surprise us? Share those thoughts and more in the comments below. Thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.